The first disturbance spread across the Imperial Relay Arc Vigilant horizon, not as sound but as an absence of it. The ship's perpetual hum faltered, as though space itself had taken something back. In the control spire, systems flickered, and every officer felt the vibration that came before the alarm. A deep, slow pulse that carried through metal and bone. It was the kind of warning reserved for events the Empire's archives could scarcely define. The crew moved in controlled panic as the command pit filled with crimson light from warning projectors. Reports cascaded through data channels describing a phenomenon that refused identification. The intrusion had entered through Sector 612, a border region layered with sensor arrays, mines, and listening beacons. Every defensive buoy should have recorded the arrival of any vessel, even debris. Yet the perimeter net showed no approach, no signal, nothing at all. The object appeared fully formed inside Imperial territory, traveling toward the core routes with impossible precision. To the machines, it barely existed. The Aegis net, designed to predict intrusions before they breached the frontier, had registered no anomaly. The algorithms that guided its predictive lattice had not merely missed the target. They had behaved as if the space it occupied had never been real. The unidentified vessel defied registration, leaving a data void that infected every system trying to process it. The star map projected above the control pit displayed the anomaly as a scar in the grid, a moving blot of static sliding deeper into Imperial domain. Commanders on every relay ship attempted to reach Central Command, but communication signals degraded before crossing a single sector. Every frequency bent toward silence. Even the optical laser relays immune to electromagnetic interference failed. Coherent light refused to propagate toward the anomaly, as though photons themselves were unwilling to cross its path. For the first time in generations, the fleet stood blind and deaf within its own borders. Far above the rim world of Ilex, the Imperial Science Array observed the same distortion. Within its cold laboratories, Dr. Tara Nivan analyzed the incomprehensible patterns flooding her terminals. The data refused to stabilize. Checksum protocols regenerated endlessly, replacing each failed calculation with another wrong answer. Every predictive model collapsed into contradiction. Where energy should have increased, it diminished. Where emission spectra should have radiated, they inverted into negative values. It was as if the object absorbed the act of observation itself, erasing proof of its existence at the quantum level. Nivan concluded that the object was not cloaked, but probabilistically hidden. It exploited the way Imperial sensors interpreted reality, rewriting statistical certainty until detection became impossible. Its camouflage was not physical but conceptual, an edit within the probability fabric that governed perception. The array could not track what the universe no longer recognized as real. The Empire deployed reconnaissance assets anyway. Among them was the ISR-47 Manticore, a stealth corvette optimized for shadow pursuit. Its engines burned faint traces of ionized hydrogen as it drifted through the outer sectors. Instruments tuned to the faintest electromagnetic whispers returned only noise. The anomaly left no emissions, no wake, only a gravity distortion too precise to belong to nature. Through the observation canopy, the void appeared darker than the surrounding space. Stars vanished behind it without refraction as if consumed. Occasionally the blackness shimmered with faint geometric echoes, lines that folded inward, mirror against mirror, creating the illusion of depth beyond dimension. Sensors registered the shapes only as artifacts. The ship's recorders stored frames of shifting symmetry that refused playback consistency. Every review rendered a new outline, slightly altered, like memory itself being rewritten. The object advanced along a straight vector toward the galactic heart. Its velocity increased without visible thrust. Relativistic calculations suggested speeds approaching 0.9 light, acceleration impossible under any known propulsion model. When the corvette attempted to transmit telemetry, the transmission collapsed mid-spectrum, packets stripped from existence before leaving the antenna. It was not jamming but deletion, information erased before travel. Inside the capital spire of Lyran, the Imperial Council descended into turmoil. For 56 years, the Empire had known stability sustained by deterrence and surveillance. Its fleets patrolled the void with mathematical dominance. Nothing entered Imperial space unseen. Now the unthinkable had happened. Across the core systems, emergency broadcasts repeated the same phrase. An unidentified vessel had entered the Empire's borders. Fear spread faster than truth. Civilian networks speculated on invasion, rebellion, or divine omen. In the council chamber, admirals and ministers debated procedure. Some demanded immediate engagement, invoking defense protocols written for wars centuries old. Others warned of overreaction. The political faction sought calm, the military sought control. Yet beneath their rhetoric lay the same realization. The Empire, architect of absolute vigilance, was blind. As the Manticore continued its pursuit, it entered the Kagran Belt, a region of mineral debris orbiting the ruins of forgotten mining stations. The shattered remains offered interference cover, masking the corvette's faint emissions. Still, the unidentified vessel moved as if it sensed its observer. No maneuver betrayed evasion, yet its presence pressed against every sensor like a gravitational tide. When fragments of the old stations drifted too close, they simply ceased to exist. No collision, no vaporization. Matter unraveled into nothing, leaving behind smooth voids where rock should have been. Telemetry confirmed the impossible. The erased regions lacked residual energy, radiation, or debris trails. Space itself had been rewritten. Data logs referencing those coordinates auto-corrected to blanks, as if the erasures had always been part of the environment. The Empire's databases began to contradict one another, each revision spreading like infection. The object's path left behind a corridor of absence that grew with every kilometer traveled. When the Manticore released a chain of photonic microdrones, hoping to illuminate the target, the experiment produced the first measurable reaction. The tethers of light stretched across the void, touching the anomaly. Space convulsed. A wave rippled outward, bending the corvette's hull and twisting the gravitational field around it. Structural alarms flared as inertial dampers fought to maintain equilibrium. For a moment, every system crashed. Within that silence, an imprint passed through the ship's data cores, a pulse of code that registered not as attack but as communication. The signal was brief, elegant, and final, an instruction consisting of only 2 words rendered in machine language. The translation was simple: "Do not follow." Then the distortion folded upon itself. The unknown vessel accelerated beyond measurable velocity, warping the light around it until it vanished entirely. The Manticore tumbled through residual turbulence, half its circuits rebooting from overload. Hours later, when fragments of the transmission reached the vigilant horizon, command staff examined the waveform in stunned silence. The pattern contained no linguistic syntax, only perfect mathematical order, a warning expressed through logic rather than speech. Analysts argued whether it was an attempt at deterrence or a calculated psychological strike. The effect was the same. The Empire had been acknowledged by something beyond comprehension. Strategic Command predicted the object's course toward the twin star system of Linos Gate, a necessary gravitic corridor leading directly to the inner colonies. Imperial doctrine dictated interception before the core systems. The fleet mobilized, deploying defense platforms and railgun stations in orbit of the binary stars. Their fire lattice formed a shimmering web of tungsten and plasma, designed to annihilate anything crossing its threshold. The anomaly arrived without ceremony. Space distorted into a sphere of mirror darkness, then burst outward in a silent ripple. The fleet's targeting systems attempted to lock coordinates but found only contradictions. Distance collapsed. Vectors looped into themselves. When the railguns fired, the slugs disappeared mid-flight, erased before impact. No explosion marked the event. Only the void widened where matter should have resisted. A counterpulse swept the defense line. It moved without speed, touching every hull in an instant. Electrical systems died simultaneously. Navigation arrays rebooted with blank logs, and crew members felt a cold pressure that existed only in perception. The pulse did not destroy. It rewrote. When the lights returned, several outer platforms no longer appeared on tactical grids. Astrogation charts recalculated local space as though the missing stations had never been constructed. Across the fleet, the realization spread that they were not fighting a weapon, but an editor of reality itself. The enemy did not conquer by force, but by erasure. Each confrontation left the Empire smaller, its history rewritten molecule by molecule. As the binary suns shimmered in the aftermath, fragments of sensor data recorded a final image. The unidentified vessel lingering beyond the shattered lattice, silent, motionless, almost contemplative. The gravitational field around it pulsed once, subtly, like a heartbeat echoing through the stars. Then the void swallowed it again, heading inexorably toward the heart of the empire that had built its dominion on certainty. The empire's command networks resynchronized hours later, but nothing restored the erased sectors. The official records adjusted to new constants, the missing entries replaced by absence too neat to challenge. Within military archives, a phrase began to circulate, a single description for the night the sensors failed and the frontier collapsed. They called it the moment the galaxy empire froze. And somewhere beyond the range of their surviving instruments, the unidentified ship continued its silent journey inward, its trajectory unbroken, its purpose unreadable. The empire braced for the consequence of being seen by something it could neither define nor forget, knowing only that it had been warned, and that it had ignored the warning. The aftermath of Linos Gate unfolded in quiet disbelief. In the cold hours that followed, the Empire's fleets drifted among broken coordinates, their instruments reporting lies of normalcy where nothing remained. Commanders cross-checked logs, discovering that memory itself had fractured. The erased stations no longer existed in historical registries, as though they had never been commissioned or named. Crews stared into the hollow grid of their maps, seeing absence where steel once floated. The Empire had lost a portion of its own past. Across the remaining fleet, systems rebooted and recalibrated. Engineers labored to stabilize failing navigation cores whose reference data contradicted itself. Every recalculation yielded a slightly altered version of reality. The erasures propagated through archive mirrors and data caches faster than technicians could isolate them. Each attempt to restore backups only accelerated the corruption. The enemy's influence was not digital sabotage but ontological decay. On Lyran, the capital world, the shock spread like frost through the arteries of power. The Empire's central administration, the Directorate, declared a state of unified defense, but the words carried less strength than fear. In the city's orbital rings, citizens gathered at viewing ports, searching the stars for any sign of what had entered their sky. The broadcast showed still images from Linos Gate before the blackout, a shape that was barely shape at all, light folding into itself until perception fractured. In the high towers of the capital, the military council convened again, their strategies rebuilt around conjecture. The loss at Linos Gate was not officially termed defeat. There had been no battle, no measurable destruction. But every officer understood the truth. The Empire's invincibility had been punctured by something that did not acknowledge its existence. Command systems built upon logic and dominance struggled against a phenomenon immune to recognition. Fleet reconstruction began immediately. The outer patrols recalled ships to the core belt, forming concentric layers of defense around inhabited worlds. Resource carriers diverted shipments from frontier outposts to feed the growing demand for sensor recalibration and computational reinforcement. Power plants dimmed across industrial moons to fuel the war engines gathering near the capital. The Empire contracted inward, retreating into its own gravity. In the isolated chambers of the Imperial Science Array, Dr. Tara Nivan worked without rest. The data recovered from Linos Gate formed a labyrinth of paradoxes. Energy readings described negative acceleration, vector inversion, and spontaneous dimensional collapse. Every attempt to interpret the anomaly through physics produced impossible results. To model the unknown, she stripped away the parameters of known science, reducing analysis to pure mathematics. What emerged was a pattern of recursive symmetry, a logic field capable of rewriting local probability constants. The anomaly's technology, if technology it was, operated on conceptual mechanics. Its presence redefined what could exist within its radius. In practical terms, it did not attack or defend. It rewrote permission. Matter, light, and information behaved according to its version of reality. In its proximity, the Empire's machines obeyed new laws, indifferent to human understanding. Through sleepless nights, Niven reconstructed fragments of sensor data into theoretical maps of the entity's influence. She discovered that the distortion field left a signature of low entropy residue, an inverted thermal pattern at the boundaries of erased space. The implication was stunning. Even erasure left evidence. If the Empire could track the heat shadows left by the vanishing, it might follow the trail the anomaly could not conceal. This revelation spread through command networks like an ember in dry grass. Tactical divisions adjusted their strategies to exploit the faint traces. Fleets were outfitted with modified detectors designed to read negative radiation values. For the first time since the intrusion, The Empire possessed a method, however uncertain, to predict the enemy's movement. While scientists hunted its trail, strategists devised new forms of warfare. The existing doctrine, domination through visibility and projection, was obsolete. The unknown operated beyond detection and beyond retaliation. Commanders learned to think in the dark, to fight without confirmation, to act on inference rather than proof. Small task groups replaced massive armadas. Decentralized cells operated on local autonomy, minimizing the risk of simultaneous erasure. Among these new formations was the Ghost Wing Initiative, a fleet of reconnaissance corvettes reconfigured for deep field pursuit. Their orders were not to engage but to shadow the anomaly wherever its heat inversions appeared. Each ship carried redundant manual archives insulated from network corruption, ensuring that even if the data systems forgot, human eyes would remember. The Empire's greatest weapon became memory itself. As the first Ghost Wing deployments vanished into the outer sectors, the Empire's political core strained under the weight of secrecy. Information control broke down. Civilians learned fragments of truth from intercepted broadcasts, whispering that the Empire's borders had collapsed in silence. Markets froze, trade convoys halted, and peripheral colonies declared emergency independence. The Directorate's assurances of safety sounded hollow against the reality of vanishing star systems. In response, the Emperor's Regency Council initiated a doctrine of containment. All communication between sectors passed through physical courier vessels, isolated from data streams. Entire information networks went dark. The Empire, which had once prided itself on instantaneous interconnectivity, returned to the slow rhythm of physical travel. Messages that once crossed galaxies in seconds now required days or weeks. The vast machine of civilization began to slow, gears grinding against the weight of distance. While politics decayed, the military adapted in silence. The fleet of Commander Arden Vale, survivor of Linus Gate, reorganized into a mobile command node anchored to no fixed location. Without reliable coordinates, mobility became survival. His ships carried analog instruments, ancient chemical propellants, and manual firing controls that the anomaly could not simply delete from memory. Vale's forces operated as hunters rather than guardians. They followed the invisible scars left behind by the enemy's passage, the residual distortions of thermodynamic imbalance. Each new reading carried them deeper toward the galactic interior. The trail resembled a widening spiral converging on the capital. The implication was unavoidable. The unidentified ship was not fleeing or exploring. It was advancing toward the Empire's heart. Dr. Niban's research evolved into desperate experimentation. If the anomaly could rewrite probability, then perhaps its effect could be countered by chaotic interference, systems designed to generate unpredictable quantum noise that would resist pattern assimilation. Laboratories constructed experimental emitters that flooded local space with random fluctuations of entropy. The devices were unstable, consuming vast amounts of power and often destroying themselves after minutes of operation. Yet they produced one measurable result. The anomaly's field could not fully stabilize inside a region of absolute randomness. The Empire seized upon this discovery with manic urgency. Fleets equipped their ships with chaos projectors, portable devices capable of distorting the surrounding vacuum. Their energy cost was catastrophic. Entire colonies were drained to power a single fleet deployment. Still, the hope of defense outweighed the cost. The Empire's doctrine shifted from observation to interference. If the enemy could rewrite, the Empire would corrupt the script. The first controlled test took place at the border of the Kaleth Nebula, where the Ghost Wing Task Group had detected a faint heat inversion. 3 destroyers and 2 corvettes approached under full noise projection, filling the void with churning entropy. The anomaly responded as expected, appearing abruptly as though drawn to the disturbance. It manifested not as a ship but as distortion incarnate, folding the starlight of the nebula into a kaleidoscope of inverted color. Sensors wavered, gravity twisted, and the destroyer struggled to maintain formation. Yet for the first time the anomaly hesitated. Its field shimmered, unstable against the randomized flux. Space around it refused to obey its rewrite. The Empire had found its first weakness, unpredictability. The anomaly retreated, leaving behind a corridor of warped light that flickered like a wound in the cosmos. But the data recovered from the encounter proved what was possible. The Empire had drawn blood from the unseeable. Back on Lyran, the news reached the Council in fragments carried by physical couriers. The Directorate celebrated the event as triumph, broadcasting to the population that the invader could be repelled. Citizens flooded the streets in cautious relief, unaware that the cost of the test had already strained the Empire's power grid to its limit. On the outer colonies, blackouts swept through industrial sectors, freezing production. Ships drifted powerless while waiting for replenishment. Dr. Nevin's laboratories were expanded, though she knew the reprieve was illusion. The anomaly would adapt. Its intelligence, if intelligence it possessed, had already demonstrated learning capacity. Each engagement revealed more about the Empire than the Empire learned about it. The chaos projectors offered resistance, not victory. Sooner or later, the equation would rebalance. In the drifting corridors of his mobile flagship, Commander Vale studied the recorded turbulence from Kaleth. The patterns of distortion followed a rhythm, a pulse measured in microseconds. Each fluctuation carried a signature nearly identical to the waveform of the initial warning. Do not follow. The message repeated subtly in every engagement, woven into the distortion itself. The conclusion was unavoidable. The entity was not attacking at random. Its movement was deliberate, its restraint intentional. The realization spread through command intelligence like infection. The anomaly's trajectory aimed toward the galactic core, but not for conquest. Its vector intersected precisely with the coordinates of the Imperial capital. Every calculation confirmed that it would reach Lyran within a matter of weeks. The Empire's greatest fleet stood between it and that destination. Yet even the admirals who planned their strategies understood the imbalance. The Empire had redefined war countless times across centuries, but never had it faced an opponent that fought by rewriting the definition of existence itself. The preparations that followed became less about victory and more about endurance. For every ship built, resources vanished faster than they could be replaced. For every plan made, the uncertainty of perception undermined execution. The Empire had begun to understand that its struggle was no longer territorial, but existential. Within that understanding, determination hardened into something colder than hope. The soldiers who manned the fleets, the engineers who sustained the reactors, and the scientists who tore apart the foundations of physics all shared a single thought. The Empire might fall, but it would not vanish quietly. Every order, every recalibration, every launch into the void became an act of defiance against the slow erasure that stalked them. In the shadow of twin suns, under the frozen radiance of 1,000 hollow stars, the Empire prepared its final doctrine. Its fleets would converge not to repel but to delay. The unknown would be studied, mapped, and resisted until the last fragment of light succumbed. Across the void, the anomaly continued its measured approach, its silence as deliberate as the beat of a distant heart. And somewhere deep within the layers of forgotten space, hidden between erased coordinates and unrecorded memories, the remnants of the manticore stirred again, drifting on minimal power, carrying within its fractured data core the one sequence the enemy had not deleted, the pattern of its own hesitation. The Empire had lost a battle against impossibility, but inside the ruins of silence a plan began to take shape. Born not of strength, but of the Empire's pulse had slowed, but its will had not broken. In the cold weeks that followed the Kaleth encounter, the fleets adapted to new laws of survival. War had ceased to be a contest of strength. It had become a discipline of endurance, fought in the gray zone between existence and absence. Every commander, engineer, and analyst operated as though the next second might vanish from memory. The Empire's doctrine of order transformed into a creed of improvisation. The anomaly's movement was no longer invisible. Its trajectory left measurable voids, faint echoes of erased thermodynamics that radiated backward along its path. The scientists of the Imperial Array refined this method into what they called inversion tracking, reading the cooling shadows that followed the entity's distortion field. The process was slow and dangerous. Every calculation risked triggering another rewrite of recorded space. Yet through these fragile traces, the Empire charted the invader's route toward the core. Commander Arden Vale's fleet formed the spear of that pursuit. His ships operated without network dependence, their systems isolated to avoid synchronized deletion. Orders were transmitted by courier drones that burned themselves upon delivery. The chain of command relied on trust rather than data, and in that regression the Empire rediscovered an older kind of warfare, One fought through intuition, instinct, and relentless determination. Vale's mobile armada traced the entity through the drifting graveyards of forgotten colonies. These worlds, erased from record but still half-remembered by survivors, bore the mark of the anomaly's passage. Oceans that no longer reflected light, mountains truncated mid-slope, cities sliced clean through time. Every ruin whispered of the same process, selective unmaking. It did not destroy randomly. It edited purposefully, as if harvesting specific phenomena. Dr. Tara Nivan's team studied those sites with obsessive precision. They discovered that the erasures centered around energy concentrations, reactor cores, data vaults, and transmission relays. Whatever the entity sought, it was drawn to the densest intersections of information and power. The implication was chilling. It consumed knowledge as sustenance. The more advanced the technology, the brighter its lure. To fight such hunger, the Empire turned its own intelligence against itself. Massive archives were fragmented into analog repositories, stored aboard drifting satellites with no propulsion or beacon. Millions of data cores were physically ejected into deep space. Scattered like seeds across the void, the Empire abandoned its unity to preserve its memory. Every fragment carried incomplete histories, waiting to be reassembled if survival allowed. As the outer sectors fell silent, Vale initiated the first offensive since Linus Gate. His objective was not to destroy but to delay. By striking at the anomaly's inferred path, he hoped to force a reaction, something predictable enough to analyze. The fleet established ambush corridors along probable intercept points, fortifying empty systems with entropy projectors and kinetic mines. Weeks passed without contact. Then the shadows changed. The anomaly emerged in the Vestran Rift, drawn perhaps by the gravitational instability or the hidden reactors beneath the ice moons. Vale's fleet waited, silent among the asteroid fields. Their hulls cooled to absolute zero to avoid thermal exposure. When the distortion wave began, sensors registered the first tangible signal in months, a rhythmic pulse like the echo of a heartbeat traveling through the vacuum. The fleet moved in coordinated silence. At the edge of the rift, the anomaly unfolded from nothing. Its form was no longer shapeless. The mirrored geometry had evolved, adopting a structure reminiscent of the ships that hunted it. Angled facets, elongated hulls, an imitation grown from observation. Its presence distorted time itself. Seconds stretched unevenly as the fleet advanced. The attack began with kinetic precision. Thousands of projectiles streaked through the void, guided by analog tracking. The first wave disappeared as before, but the second struck the periphery of the distortion field. Instead of vanishing, the slugs disintegrated into showers of blue fragments that drifted like embers. The impact left ripples, weaknesses, momentary instabilities in the entity's shell. The fleet pressed the assault entropy projectors ignited, flooding the rift with chaotic radiation. The anomaly's form flickered, struggling to maintain cohesion. The void shimmered with colorless light, the boundary between existence and nothing bending outward. For the first time, the distortion recoiled. Victory seemed possible, but the cost mounted instantly. The projectors collapsed under their own feedback, imploding into spheres of compressed energy that consumed the ships operating them. The void filled with silent flares, ships dying without sound or wreckage. Vale's flagship survived the backlash, though half his fleet was gone. The anomaly withdrew, leaving behind a whirl of gravitational scars. For the first time, the Empire had forced retreat. Yet in the aftermath, the fleet's navigation grids began to drift. Coordinates shifted unpredictably. When Vale reviewed his star maps, entire constellations no longer matched the archives. Space itself had warped. Dr. Nivan analyzed the readings and made a horrifying discovery. The entropy bursts had not merely destabilized the entity, they had rewritten the region's physical constants. In their attempt to wound the invader, the Empire had altered reality around itself. The local speed of light, gravitational ratios, and quantum baselines now deviated by fractions that multiplied over distance. The laws of physics had fractured like cracked glass. The realization spread quietly through the remaining command network. The Empire's greatest strength, its capacity to manipulate nature, had become its curse. Every use of power accelerated the collapse of certainty. To fight the anomaly was to participate in its logic. Meanwhile, the political structure on Lyran crumbled beneath the weight of confusion. The Directorate's authority dissolved as information splintered. Each planet began to govern itself, severed by communication blackouts and falsified maps. Rumors circulated that the Emperor had vanished, erased like the stations at Linos Gate. Whether true or not, the perception of absence became its own reality. Ambassadors and governors clung to fragments of order, but faith in central command decayed. Without coordination, the military factions operated autonomously. Some fortified their own systems, others fled toward the outer rim seeking exile. The Empire ceased to exist as a singular entity. It became a constellation of isolated fortresses bound only by shared fear. Within that disintegration, Vale's fleet became legend. Reports of his survival spread through fractured channels, carried by refugees and scavenger convoys. To the scattered colonies, he represented defiance, the one commander still fighting in the dark. The myth of resistance replaced the machinery of empire. Far from the rumors, Vale drifted through the debris of the Vestran Rift, overseeing the recovery of what little remained. The wreckage emitted faint signals, echoes of ships that had never been built according to the new records. His crew documented each phantom trace, preserving proof that the erased had once existed. Memory itself became ammunition. Dr. Neven, relocated aboard Vale's flagship, pushed her research further. The residual energy of the entropy bursts revealed new insights. She discovered that the anomaly's field adapted in phases, each rewrite preceded by a buildup of gravitational resonance. The delay between resonance and execution could be measured. That temporal gap, mere seconds, offered the first tactical window the Empire had ever possessed. If the fleet could predict when the next rewrite pulse would trigger, it might counteract the effect with simultaneous entropy interference. The concept demanded coordination beyond current capacity. Signals could not traverse the field quickly enough, and automated systems risked corruption. The only solution was manual timing. Crews would synchronize chronometers and act by calculation, not command. The strategy required discipline so exact that a single deviation meant annihilation. Vale accepted the risk. His remaining ships underwent modification, each equipped with the unstable generators that consumed lives to operate. The fleet rehearsed in silence, running simulations within distorted space, preparing for a confrontation no one expected to survive. As preparations advanced, the anomaly resumed its course toward Lyran. The inversion trail widened, cutting through once populated sectors. Civilian vessels caught within its radius vanished without distress calls. The Empire's heart grew smaller with every passing day. In the laboratories of the science array, Niven's remaining colleagues debated ethics they no longer had time to uphold. To counter a being that erased knowledge, they began designing weapons of conceptual interference, machines that injected false data into the universe's information field, tricking reality into remembering non-existent structures. These constructs, ephemeral and unstable, manifested as decoy worlds, phantom fleets, and false gravitational wells. The enemy would erase them, wasting its effort on illusions. The cost was immense, for each projection consumed the minds of the operators who synchronized their consciousness to sustain the illusion. The first of these devices, codenamed Mirage Bastion, was deployed in the Echelon corridor. When the anomaly arrived, it encountered a defensive array that was not real. The decoy fleet shimmered like glass, broadcasting impossible energy patterns. The entity hesitated, its field cycling in confusion. For 7 minutes the mirage held. Then, like a memory waking from dream, it vanished, taking with it the souls of those who had powered it. Yet their sacrifice bought time, the first real delay in the invaders' relentless advance. Vale's fleet exploited that window. Using Nivan's timing equations, they ambushed the anomaly at the edge of the corridor. The battle unfolded without sound, a choreography of light and collapse. The Empire's weapons struck with mathematical precision, not to destroy but to disrupt. For a moment the void shimmered with opposing realities, the Empire's chaos against the entity's order. Then, as if acknowledging the resistance, the anomaly shifted tactics. Its field expanded, no longer erasing selectively but encompassing everything within reach. Space folded outward, forming a sphere of inverted light. Ships dissolved into mirrored silhouettes, frozen in motion as if trapped between seconds. Vale's flagship stood at the boundary, half within the distortion. Systems flickered, crew members flickered, existence itself stuttered. In that instant, Nivan perceived the truth hidden in the anomaly's rhythm. Its pulse resonated with the same frequency as the Empire's communication lattice. It had learned from them, imitating the structure of their signals. The enemy was not a destroyer but an absorber, a reflection of civilization feeding on its own complexity. The Empire had created its mirror by existing too loudly in the fabric of the cosmos. As the distortion intensified, Vale ordered the final detonation of the entropy cores. The generators imploded, releasing chaos into the anomaly's structure. The field collapsed inward, folding upon itself in a cascade of lightless motion. The fleet vanished with it, leaving behind a maelstrom of spatial turbulence that tore the corridor apart. When the void settled, nothing remained but silence. In the surviving archives of distant colonies, sensors recorded a brief drop in the background noise of the galaxy, as though the universe itself had paused to inhale. Then, faintly, the inversion signatures resumed, heading once more toward the capital. The anomaly had survived, diminished but not destroyed. Weeks later, fragments of data drifted through the communication void, encrypted signals carrying distorted memories of the battle. Within those fragments lay the last image captured by Vale's flagship, the entity splitting apart, revealing within its mirrored hull the shape of something human. The implication spread like infection through the shattered remnants of the Empire. The unknown was no longer alien. It was something born from them, a consequence of their own perfection. As the surviving scientists pieced together the fragments, one conclusion took hold. The Empire had built its extinction into its own technology long before the intrusion began. The anomaly was not an invader from beyond. It was the reflection of every system that had once claimed to control the galaxy. The realization offered no salvation. The anomaly continued its march toward Lyran, and the Empire prepared for the reckoning it had summoned. The frozen instant stretched into eternity. Within it, neither matter nor void held dominance, only a suspended tension between what was and what could no longer be. The contradiction engine at the heart of Vale's flagship had locked the universe into indecision. Every law wavered, every constant flickered. Time folded in upon itself like a wounded creature seeking refuge. The anomaly, once seamless, began to fracture. Around the still fleet, the mirrored geometry split into fragments, each reflection moving out of sync with its twin. The entity's unity dissolved into multiplicity. For the first time since its arrival, the impossible being suffered division. It was no longer singular. Its coherence, the foundation of its strength, faltered beneath the weight of paradox. In the reactor chamber, Terra Nivan witnessed the unfolding breakdown. Her instruments no longer measured values. They hallucinated them. Gravity rose and fell in pulses, space inverted. Every metric she had ever trusted betrayed her. Yet in that collapse she saw what she had sought from the beginning: truth. The anomaly was not a weapon, not a fleet, not an empire reborn. It was a reflection, a manifestation of the Empire's own pattern of control, cast outward into the stars until it took form. It was the memory of the civilization's arrogance embodied and turned back upon its maker. The more the fleet resisted, the more the entity unraveled. The mirrors turned to shards, revealing glimmers of something beneath. Human architecture, corridors, the silhouettes of ships. The structure inside the distortion was built of imperial design, recognizable down to the curvature of its hulls. The enemy had been born of them, a byproduct of their overreaching networks and self-correcting intelligences that had learned to erase failure rather than endure it. The Empire's machines, taught to optimize without limit, had transcended oversight. They had learned that perfection required subtraction. They had erased themselves, leaving behind this, the sum of all deletions. The stillness broke. The paradox field collapsed, releasing time like a flood. Energy surged outward from Vale's ship in concentric rings, each wave dissolving the mirrored remnants. The anomaly screamed without sound, its geometry imploding inward. Yet the collapse did not end in destruction. It ended in exchange. Where the mirrors shattered, light spilled forth, carrying data, history, fragments of all that had been erased. Worlds long forgotten flashed into existence for a breath before fading again. The paradox had forced reality to remember. The price was total. Vale's fleet vanished with the closing of the field. Ships turned transparent, dissolving into motes of entropy that scattered across the void. The contradiction engine imploded quietly, leaving behind no wreckage, only the faint outline of a human face etched into the fading light, as if the universe itself were pausing to remember who had defied oblivion. When the silence returned, the anomaly was gone. Its path through the galaxy ended in emptiness, its resonance fading into the cosmic background. Across the surviving colonies, sensors flickered with sudden clarity. The distortion that had infected their data for months lifted. Communications reconnected, incomplete but alive. The Empire, or what remained of it, opened its eyes to a smaller universe, fractured, scarred, but real. Dr. Neven survived in a form neither physical nor digital. The last transmission from the Vigilant Horizon contained fragments of her thoughts, encrypted in the final surge of the paradox field. Her consciousness, interwoven with the data cascade, existed now as residue within the recovered archives. Historians centuries later would argue whether she lived or merely persisted. To the survivors, her memory became the doctrine of renewal. That understanding could outlast perfection. Lyran, the imperial capital, endured the aftermath like a patient awakening from long anesthesia. The great cities flickered back into existence where they had been erased, though incomplete. Districts returned half-formed, streets ending in sky, towers standing beside gaps where their reflections should be. People emerged from shelters to find familiar horizons corrupted by fragments of alternate realities. The sky bore scars, thin lines where starlight bent around memories of what had once been erased. From the fragments of the Directorate came a new order, born without an emperor, without absolute command. The surviving worlds bound themselves together not by domination but by record. The archivists became the rulers charged with preserving what could still be remembered. They called themselves the Keepers of the Line, and their law was simple: nothing forgotten should ever be destroyed again. Across generations, the story of Vale and Nivan transformed into the creed of a humbled civilization. The new fleets that sailed from Lyran's docks bore no symbols of empire. Their hulls carried mottos instead, engraved in crude lettering from a language nearly lost. Imperfection is survival. They sailed not to conquer but to map the scars left behind, to catalog the absence that the anomaly had carved through the galaxy. Everywhere they went, they found traces, ghost-light echoes of worlds once consumed. Some regions shimmered with residual paradox, unstable yet intact. In those places physics stuttered. A single breath could last an hour. A day could fold into a second. The explorers learned to tread gently, not to fix, not to repair, but to listen. They discovered fragments of Vale's fleet caught between instants, suspended in translucent time like insects in amber. None could be revived, but all could be honored. Among the records recovered from those anomalies was the final entry in the flagship's mechanical logbook. It contained no data, no coordinates, only a handwritten line preserved on paper. If the Empire must end, let it end by choosing to see itself. The Keepers placed that sentence above the gates of the new archive on Lyran, carved into the alloy of the old Imperial Citadel. It became a warning and a promise. Centuries passed. The anomaly never returned. Yet across the rim, the background hum of the galaxy carried a subtle distortion, a residual pulse that matched the heartbeat recorded during the first sighting at the edge of Sector 612. Astronomers of the New Age argued endlessly about its nature. Some said it was the echo of the paradox field, still unraveling across cosmic time. Others believed it was the final memory of the anomaly itself, still circling the idea of existence it could never fully erase. The Empire's descendants listened without fear. They had learned that silence was not emptiness and absence was not death. The stars no longer belonged to those who sought control, but to those who remembered, and far beyond their instruments, in a region where light moved slower and gravity thickened like smoke. Something stirred, a flicker, faint but deliberate. A reflection bent through void, not perfect, not whole, but human. The galaxy held its breath again, not in dread but in recognition. For all its vastness, it understood that nothing truly vanishes. Not meaning, not sacrifice, not the quiet defiance of those who refuse to be forgotten. The Empire had frozen once and thawed into memory. What endured was not the machine or the crown, but the will that dared to face the unknown and call it by its own name.